Let me start by thanking all our panelists today and, of course, our colleagues who are joining us as audience and as participants. On behalf of the SDPI team, I welcome you all to this online meeting on better business regulatory environment in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's large enterprise sector. This dialogue series is part of SDPI's initiative to support Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI, which is being spearheaded by the Board of Investment and Ministry of Commerce. The objective of today's meeting is to look at three specific areas of better business regulation. First, of course, the provincial tax regime faced by the large businesses, finance and funding environment for these businesses, and then the province and local level regulations pertaining to trade licenses, access to utilities, etc. This is the last part of our series for the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The first meeting focused on MSMEs, the second on the services sector. However, now with the ambition to attract investment and investors in SEZs and other large zones, we would like to see what are the demands and expectations of those who are in large-scale sector of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The proceedings for today's meeting are also expected to be inputs for the draft PRMI strategy under the chairmanship of Dr. Ishrat Saab. And there will be an agenda setting presentation by my colleague, Mr. Ahad Nazir, after which we'll be requesting our esteemed panelists for their inputs. I am indeed grateful to our panel for taking time out. These highly respected colleagues include Mr. Zahidullah Shinwari Sahib, who's former President, Sarat Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Hassan Daud Butt Saab, who is CEO of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment and Trade, Mr. Hassan Khabar Saab, who's team leader of Sustainable Energy and Economic Development Program in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Ms. Shamama Arbab Saiba, who's chairperson, Pakistan Stone Development Company, Ministry of Industries, and Mr. Muhammad Javed Ismail Saab, who's Director, Financial Stability Department, State Bank of Pakistan. Our participants can also post their questions in the chat box, and we'll be requesting our panelists to take those questions as well as we go along. With permission from all of you, this meeting is being recorded and the video will be available for you to share across your networks. We welcome you to revisit the discussion later and feel free to share it across your colleagues. Before I pass on to our esteemed panelists, I will request my colleague, Mr. Ahad Nazir, for a very brief agenda setting presentation. Ahad, it's over to you.
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Waqar, and all the panelists who have joined us. So basically, this is as Dr. Waqar has already informed the panel that this is the third meeting of a series of meetings that we held for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The first meeting was particularly focused on the small and medium enterprises. Then there was a meeting on the services sector, and this is the third one, which is focusing on the large corporations. Just to give you an idea about the initial two meetings and of course the basis for our research and advocacy that has led to these meetings. We started off with a survey, and the link of the report that was part of that survey has already been shared with you in the email you got as invitation. That survey was basically on the quality of foreign investment, and one of the basic challenges that the private sector felt in luring in private investment into Pakistan was the difficult regulatory environment that we have, and of course that is also proven by several of the parameters we have, including the doing business ranking. So just to give you a basic idea about the objectives of the meeting, and just to set the agenda, we have prepared a brief presentation, and of course we can follow up with your comments, and we can add to that. So just to give you a brief input on the Pakistan macroeconomic framework, we know COVID-19 has basically been keeping growth depressed. There is a weak investment to GDP ratio. The expanded tax effort under weak economic expansion, and of course the fiscal deficit may again be higher than estimated, and of course the capacity to support firms diminishes if recovery takes longer. So and of course while we are talking, there is a second wave of COVID coming in, and we are expecting that there will be some lockdown, some sort of lockdown again, and this will again be of course very damaging to the businesses. So just to give you an idea about the state of economy, so we have, of course, there is some activity picking up in the construction sector. The large-scale manufacturing output dropped by 10.2 in the fiscal year 20. There is an assumption that agricultural output may have been rescued during COVID-19, but again, we have incidences of hoarding and similar things which can actually affect the supply and demand in the market. Similarly, inflation rose by 8.2% year on year in August fiscal year 20, and again this will negatively impact the overall economic stability conditions. And of course, when you don't have the consumption power, even if the large corporations do manufacture something and that is not ready for export, then they will actually be at loss. Similarly, we are expecting the state bank discount rate to actually go up prior to the next tranche of IMF. So again, this might add to the inflation, and again, of course, our recovery has been better than expected, but again, the expanded refinance facilities may not see an extension. So, and of course, the other thing that we have seen is the refinance facilities utilization. That percentage is still a question mark. Exports have seen an uptick despite a decline of 19.5% during August year on year. Imports have dropped by 20% during the same month. Reasons, of course, have been the SOPs resulting in higher costs, again, monsoon rains, delays in transport, port operations, power outages, and of course, remittances continue to support the balance of payment, and of course, we're trying to resume the business activity, especially with the Gulf countries, and FDI grew to a total of 2.6 billion in financial year 20, and of course there have been Chinese and non-Chinese investment coming in. There are some structural issues that we will like you to actually discuss here. There is a IMF program needs to be back on track. Power sector reforms, the circular debt is now 2.2 trillion, and I think Hassan Saab has been writing about it, and we'd like to hear more about the cost of power, because we have ensured, partly ensured the availability of power during the last few years, but the cost of power again is a huge concern still. The government finances, we really need to work on reforms of the tax authorities at federal and provincial level, and expenditure management as well. State-owned enterprises are also problematic. There is a need for clarity at this point as well. So just to look at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province is 17% of the national GDP. Population is around 17.9%, and the share in country's workforce is 36.3%. But we don't actually reflect the same numbers when it comes to export, although we might not have the exact figures, but Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's private sector has not been able to export as much as we would like them to, especially considering that they are actually 17% of our economy. With regards to the budgetary position, the provincial government has uncertainty of federal transfers. They need to work on their own capacities. They need to have their own revenue mobilization. They need to have more stronger working on revenue mobilization. Although there have been some very positives, some very good positive points in the budgets, in the previous budget, like construction and oil and gas sector has been exempted from GST services. There have been COVID-related financial incentives, but still the private sector tells us that they have not been able to access those financial incentives that were announced. So this is probably one of the root causes of the problem. So we also followed up our research report with quarterly investment bulletins, and of course our focus was on Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in the last quarter, and the main issues that we found out through a small survey were basically the main issue is land, business space, rental laws, tax compliance cost, access to formal finance difficulty, inadequacy of digital payment infrastructure, and of course weak access to public procurement opportunities. And these all basically are the things that most of the businesses in Pakistan feel, but Khyber Pakhtunkhwa especially is facing these problems. Just to talk about competitiveness, because we are talking about large businesses, and competitiveness is very much important. Just to give you some ideas, we have, based on our own research we conducted in 2017-18, and of course taking research from other partners like IGC, SERP, we have come up with these 6 main problems with the competitiveness of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa private sector. So first one is the ease of doing business. Almost all the factors here have not been up to the mark. In a survey that was conducted in 2010, where Faisalabad came out to be the most the city with the most ease of doing business, Peshawar came out to be the 10th, which is a serious concern, and similar surveys need to be conducted more regularly. Energy seems to be a very, very important problem, and during our own working that we did in 2017 and 18 with the World Bank, energy came out to be the most, the availability and affordability of energy came out to be the most important factor in competitiveness or export competitiveness of the private sector in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The third one is the transportation infrastructure, although through CPEC and CARIC, both are facilitating the transportation infrastructure. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, for example, we have seen a total change at the Torkham border. The border management system is much better now than it used to be, but still there is a need for better transportation infrastructure, maybe railways and other types of transport as well, to connect Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, areas of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with the rest of Pakistan. Rule of law, although this has been a major impediment in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and keeping in view the unfortunate incident that happened just yesterday, I think this remains to be one of the priority areas where the government needs to work. And of course, e-governance and human resource capacity building comes next. So just to take a few minutes for the progress of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as per the PRMI meeting that took place, 1 year progress meeting that took place just a few days back. I'll just like to point out some of the things that the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government has actually done. The land registration tax has been reduced. The CVT capital value tax has been abolished. Several of the registration fees at the provincial level have been abolished. There has been exemption of local council tax for immovable property till June 2021, exemption of fee for registration of deeds and mutations till June 2021, reduction of sales tax on services for 25 items from 15% to 2%. That has also been done, and some of the things include the tax rate of 8% is reduced to 5% for restaurants when using POS system, then up to 35% discount on urban immovable property tax, elimination of entertainment tax, bed tax for hotels, free re-registration of vehicles, zero professional tax on 19 categories subject to their registration with CAPRA, and no new taxes or no increase in taxation in 2020-21. My personal opinion, having looked at the progress of all the provinces, is that this progress is more focused on reducing the tax rates rather than focusing on making the administrative cost of paying taxes low. So I think there is a requirement for more automated systems that can actually help the business persons to pay these taxes and have reduced administrative cost of paying taxes. And some of the things that are in progress in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as per PRMI is the basically establishment of KP official business platform, which is exactly what I said. This will actually reduce the doing business, the effort that we put into doing business. There is a need for, there is also some working on the development of online business, building plan approval system, study to ascertain the regulatory requirements for SMEs, formulation of policy strategies that overall that basically converge all these factors into indicative numbers showing that we have actually got some success in the doing business regime. And of course, tourism sector has been included in PRMI, which actually was required. So just a way forward, these are just 4 to 5 points that I'll just leave with you so that we can hear more because you're the experts on Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. First of all, there is a need for creation of a firm level bankable asset to address financing and collateral issues. Most of the firms still find the risk scoring mechanism very difficult to comply with. The subcontracting and outsourcing in the development budget, there is a requirement for that to help the mid-sized firms. There is a balanced scorecard approach for enterprise focus. There is a need to focus on firm capabilities, technology adoption, and eliminate, automate, and rationalize regulatory burden, basically what PRMI stands for, and fresh transportation studies and evaluation based on CARIC-funded water management system at Torkham. I think this is a huge opportunity to improve the cross-border trade with Afghanistan. That's all from my side. I'll be happy to take questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahad. I think this has sort of set a good tone for the rest of the meeting. And of course, we will invite our panelists for their inputs as well as their own take on these observations in your presentation. Of course, we do see that Mr. Hassan Daud Butt's department had a lot of role to play in the achievements which you have indicated under PRMI. Of course, there is no room for complacency and more needs to be done. With, of course, permission of our colleagues from the government and the regulatory side, if I can first give the chance to our colleagues from the private sector to have their take, and then I want to bring in our colleagues from the government, the state bank. And what I would request in the interest of time, that each one of us limits our interventions to 5 to 6 minutes each, so that there could be a second round as well. And I can already see questions pouring in on the chat as well, so we'll have to take them too. So with this, if I can...
So there is a request. I think Ma'am Shamama is facing some issues with the audio. So if we can take her at a later stage and maybe start off with Mr. Shinwari.
Most welcome. Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So as Ahad has indicated, we'll first invite Mr. Zahidullah Shinwari sir, who is the former president of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Of course, also a very noted business person, entrepreneur is in his own right. Zahid sir, please.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much, Mr. Waqar, and thank you very much, SDPI, for arranging this webinar on a very important subject, and that is the existence and issues related to the large corporations, business corporations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Unfortunately, we don't have many large business corporations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We have a few from sugar industry and cement sector, and also from textile. A few of them can be categorized as large corporations. So first of all, there is a problem with the policies of the government, and at least they should have a policy to bring large corporations to the backward areas of Pakistan, like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. And some foreign investors who are coming to Pakistan and invest in Pakistan, they have been given special protection in shape of taxes and other benefits. They should be requested to establish their large corporations in other parts of the country, not only in Karachi and in Lahore. For example, this Agrochemicals Corporation in Karachi, which is a joint venture by Asahi Japan and Mitsubishi Japan, they should have been requested to establish their industry in Haripur or in Mardan or some other parts of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So that would have brought these areas economically developed and many job opportunities for the people of that area. But the major issue is this ease of doing business problem. We have a ranking of Pakistan ease of doing business ranking. I think we should have city-wise ease of doing business ranking in Pakistan. And somebody told me that Islamabad is #1 in ease of doing business ranking within the country. I am not sure, but maybe Dr. Waqar should know about it. But surely, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa would have been at the bottom of the list. We are facing many problems in this regard. So this provision of conducive environment is the sole job of the government and the public sector in the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They have brought this industrial policy 2016, and unfortunately, it was not implemented in true spirit. And again, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Board of Investment and Trade are working on another industrial policy, which is Industrial and Investment Policy 2020. And Mr. Hassan Daud Butt is working very hard on it, and he is involved all the stakeholders of the province in it. So right now, we have only one major advantage, and that is the market of Afghanistan. And my personal story, it was a family project. It was a small venture, and then I entered into the large manufacturing industries of Pakistan. But the sole and the major reason was the access and market of Afghanistan. I was exporting my product to Afghanistan, and that gave me a competitive edge over other competitors in Gujranwala, Lahore, and other parts of the country. So unfortunately, our export to Afghanistan are declining since 2012, and for the first time in last 1 decade, we could not touch $1 billion, and we have exports of $800 million to Afghanistan in financial year 2019-2020. And of course, there was a Corona lockdown over there for 3 months, but it is on declining trend since 2012, which was $2.7 billion in 2012. So the other major problem is over regulations, too many regulations. I have already requested Mr. Hassan Daud Butt to please work on it. They have overlapping jobs. Would you believe it? There are 20 provincial acts, and for the labor management, we have 5 acts. We have KP Workers' Compensation Act 2013. We have KP Minimum Wages Act 2013. We have KP Payments of Wages Act, and we have KP Industrial and Commercial Employment Act 2013 and KP Industrials Relation Act. All they are related to the labor management. So it is extremely over-regulated businesses in Pakistan industry, especially over-regulated. So for ease of doing business, we need to minimize these departments. We have to interact with more than 47 departments in Pakistan, is you have written somewhere in an article which I was reading. And so the problem is that this is an over-regulated industry, and it adds to the cost of doing business in our area, and also wastage of time. So if we have an ideal industrial policy in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, so the number of these departments which we have to interact during our business should be minimized, should be brought down. The other thing is vendor industry. We don't have any vendor industry. For large corporation, you need a supply chain where you should have a competent and efficient vendor industry. Once I was talking to the Toyota Corporation in Japan, and I told them that in Pakistan, if you buy a car, you have to pay 6 months earlier, and you will get the car after 7 months. Why? You are manufacturing 2,400 cars in one plant in Nagoya. 2,400. We have a maximum demand for 60,000 cars in a year. So why you can't manufacture these cars in Pakistan, where you can produce 2,400 cars in a single plant in Nagoya? So he told me the problem is not with the manufacturing of engines. We will send our engines in containers. The problem is with vendor industry. They don't supply that much parts to our plants. So the same is applied to large corporations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. For large corporations, they need supply of parts, intermediary goods, and other services, and we don't have any established vendor industry. So this is the egg and chicken sort of dilemma. If we got some large corporations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we will get vendor industry. So there is the major player of government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. They should have come forward. They should have a policy of bringing large corporations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and the existing large corporations should be facilitated. There is access to access and expansion of load in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is another issue. It takes 3 years to enhance your load from 2 megawatts to 3 megawatts. If you want to bring some more industry machinery and you want to upgrade your load, so it takes long time. It takes 2 to 3 years. So this is another issue. And the technical availability of technical staff from other parts of the country, and especially for the establishment and erection of machinery. So you have to brought engineers from abroad, and they are always reluctant to come to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I have faced this problem, and my machinery was lying in our factory, and nobody was willing to come and install this machinery in my factory. So there are many, many factors, and we are, especially from the Chamber of Commerce, are already working on it. We have got a few papers in our research and development cell. So we have already provided these documents to the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So there should be more interaction, there should be more discussion, and we should be on board with them, so that then we can reach a conclusion and we can bring some industrial development in our area, and we can bring some large corporations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
Thank you so much. And so I think this was very comprehensive, and of course you spoke from experience, and your inputs are really valued. Let me now check if Ms. Shamama Arbab is available, and in case there are no connectivity issues, we can quickly request her for her inputs as well.
So maybe we can go for Hassan Saab first, and because Ma'am Shamama is basically changing her laptop.
Absolutely, please. So Hassan Saab, thank you very much for joining us. I understand that you're doing this you've taken a very innovative approach in your program, which you are trying to implement in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We hear good news about the developments and how you're supporting the government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And we would really like to have your take on the subject. It's over to you, Hassan Saab.
Dr. Saab, thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar, a subject which is very close to me, not only professionally, but also very close to my heart, because, you know, I've been advocating about a better regulatory environment for a while now. So it's really a pleasure. Thank you. And I am very impressed by the presentation, the work that you guys are doing, and I'm sure it will go a long way in shaping the regulatory environment in KP. I want to start with three quick observations that I had. So I think the first is the way you structured this session. And I would call it private sector first. You said, I would want private sector to come in first and then the government. I think that's the approach we need to take within the government when we talk about regulatory environment, that private sector first. Because what generally is the tendency is that the government keeps on mulling over regulations without speaking to private sector. And I think those are the people that are right in the middle of the action. So I think I just wanted to appreciate that. A couple of things that I picked from what Zahid Saab said. So Zahid Saab said something about the vendor industry. And I think that's spot on. It's very difficult to bifurcate large corporations from the vendor industry, which is mostly SMEs. So large corporations, based on our interaction, based on our diagnostics, generally do not face the same problems because they have the muscle, they have lawyers, they have corporate affairs staff. They know how to manage their way through cumbersome government regulations. It's the SMEs that find it hard to breathe. And if SMEs cannot breathe, if the vendor industry cannot work, then the large corporations' performance also gets affected. So I think that's spot on. The third thing that Zahid Saab said, and I think it was, he said it very simply, but I think that's the key message. He said too many regulations. We are very regulation happy. You go and talk to any regulator, they'd say we are making this regulation and that regulation without giving any regard to what impact would it have on the businesses. And I think the reason for that is that generally government, like any large bureaucracy, whether in private sector or public sector, we think in silos. If I am wearing the hat that Hassan Daud Butt is wearing, and I think he's doing a tremendous job, then of course I am facilitating businesses. But if, for example, I am, I don't know, sitting in food authority, then I am going for the most stringent regulations. If I'm in the industries department and I'm thinking through boiler regulations, then I'm trying to really make it very, very tight. And I think that's the problem. So at one end, people like Butt Saab are facilitating businesses. On the other side, the regulators apparently in their own head are doing a great job because they are making great regulations, but without any consideration to what it would mean for businesses which are operating in KP or for that matter, anywhere in the province. So I think these were the three observations that I had. Now, I think there are a couple of other things that I want to mention. One is that generally our focus in this country on investment generation is incentives. Uh, we want to reduce taxes, we want to give real estate on cheaper prices and all of those things. Now, when you go a little bit deeper, you realize that number one, incentives play a very small role in attracting a credible businessman. Generally, they are more concerned about the commercial opportunities, the overall business environment. And yes, the incentives, targeted incentives do make a difference, but they are not the full story. They are only a small part of the story. I remember having a conversation with a few big telecom companies, their CEOs, I think last year, and they said more than the tax rate, more than the duties, what matters to us is the predictability of those duties. You tell us once, you want to tax us more, you want to tax us less, whatever that is, we'll put that into our spreadsheets, we'll run the scenarios, we would know how to manage them. So I think predictability is important. So if governments can rise above political differences over different regimes and can give a predictable scenario that businessmen like Madam Shamama, like Zaid Saab, like others, they can do their business planning for the next 10 years. And I think for right now, we can't do that. We cannot even do the planning for a year. We do know that IMF is engaging with the government. Right now, we are in talks for increasing the sales tax. We are looking to resume the IMF program. And I think those point towards our fiscal difficulties. I'm not saying we shouldn't or we should, but what I'm saying is that businessmen cannot predict with certainty. And I think the government must realize that the fiscal problems that they are facing are not going to go away for a long time to come. And the best way to approach investment is not through expensive fiscal incentives, it is through creating better regulations. The reason why we go for fiscal incentives could be understanding, but also because it's easy. As a policymaker, I just have to notify, okay, the tax rate comes down from 15 to 2, it's easy to do. Fixing regulations is difficult, but attracting investment is also difficult. If we are serious in attracting investment, we would need to do difficult work. It's not going to be easy. Now, there is something that the program that I'm heading, SEED, is funded by FCDO. There is something that we are doing. Whether we are going to be successful or not, I think I don't want to comment on that. But what I can give assurance is that we are going to try really hard and we are going to put in our best effort. And the way that we are doing is something called regulatory guillotine. And regulatory guillotine is a brand name. It's a patented name by an organization, which is a way to cut down unnecessary regulation. You map everything that is there, and then you look at each and every regulation, whether it's essential, whether it is adding value, whether it's efficient. And if not, you bring in a certain date on which all the unnecessary regulations go away. Now, it is easier said than done. Let's see how the government responds. But so far, government has been very, very proactive in approaching that. I think the second part of the regulations bit is that even in 2020 or 2021, we do away with unnecessary regulations. Starting next day, we are going to get more regulations, right? Because bureaucracy is a moving animal. They are always thinking. They are always coming up with new things. So how to approach that? The good news is that other bureaucracies have faced similar problems. It's not just unique to Pakistan. And there are different models. The one that I like the most is one in, one out model, which means as a cabinet you decide, okay, we are open for new regulations, but what can you take out, right? So if you want one new regulation, let's take out one old regulation. We would need that kind of thinking. Now, the third thing is that if, for example, if you go back, if you time travel, you go back to 1960s, KP was the thing, right? There were a lot of industrial investments. And then, of course, things went south. And the last decade had been quite rough for KP. Now we want to change that. And I think that's a good objective. But I think we would need to do something big. Changing regulations is essential. but that's incremental. And if we want quick results, we do not have 70 years to make KP recover, which means that we'll have to do something extraordinary. I think one thing where government's role is very important, apart from regulations, is commercial transactions, is facilitating those transactions, is coming up with public-private partnerships. SEED, for example, is working with energy sector, it's working with housing sector. Now, the problem that I see is when I go and talk to stakeholders, not in energy so much, but in other sectors which are not very commercially savvy, that they want private investment, but they do not wear the commercial hat, right? So I'll give you an example. You may have a great project. You may have a project that private sector would be interested to invest in, but it may not be bankable. You may not have a special purpose vehicle created for that. And I think that's the kind of approach that the government needs to take. I think the focus should be on commercial engagement. And I know that I have limited time, and I think these are some of the challenges. But I would want towards the end, in the last couple of minutes, I would want to end with a positive note. And the positive note is that KP is changing. And I think that's the underlying message which should go out to all our investors and we should internalize. And why is KP changing for the better? A few reasons. Number one, when you look at the literature around investments, industrialization on KP, time in and time out you read locational disadvantage. KP was not a port city, can never be a port city. But in recent years, because of the developments, that locational disadvantage is turning into a locational advantage. Ahad Saab has talked about the border management system at Torkham for Carrick. Carrick is a huge framework for connectivity. Then we have talked about CPEC. CPEC may or may not shift our fortune overnight, but CPEC does mean connectivity. CPEC does mean that KP would be having an advantage when it would come to connectivity, at least with some of the Chinese provinces, right, which are in their western half. So I think that is one. The second is energy prices. You talked, Adsab, you talked about energy. For long, NEPRA has had these wheeling regulations, but KP has done the first wheeling transaction in Pehul, which resulted in availability of cheaper electricity for its industries. And right now, PEDO is working through SEED's help in coming up with another portfolio of projects on wheeling, which would mean that this electricity, which is being generated in KP through its own hydro resources, would be available to industrialists of KP at a lower price, because KP has to compete. KP is not starting the race on equal footing. KP is actually a few hundred meters behind the others, right? KP has to compete with Faisalabad, KP, which is the hub of textiles. KP has to compete with Karachi, which is the port city. And none of the other provinces, fortunately, had to undergo what KP had to undergo in terms of the war on terror. And I think this is one thing which could be a game changer, providing electricity on competitive rates. And I think the framework is there, the model is there, the will is there. I think that's the second reason why I think KP is changing. The third is the newly merged districts. For last 70 years, they were tribal areas. They were operating behind a thick curtain. These are new areas. Thank God that the war on terror is not there. And they are now part of mainstream KP, offering new challenges, but also new opportunities, which can generally change, can be very exciting. It can be painful, yet very exciting. And I think that's another thing that is there. And the last thing is, because it's not because of SEED, I've worked in all provinces, I've worked with the government, I've worked with donors, everyone. And I do think that the leadership in KP right now is very, very reform oriented, at least in the sectors that I work on. And I'm talking about finance, I'm talking about health, I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about housing. The politicians are very, very reform oriented. And I have not seen a similar will or a similar eagerness in other provinces. So I think we need to be realistic. We need to be hopeful that KP is changing. But as I said earlier, it's going to be a difficult journey because we are ambitious. We are ambitious that we have to make KP the best destination for large corporations and SMEs in Pakistan. And I think it's a long journey, but I'm very hopeful that it will go well. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan Saab. I think some very insightful points came out of your initial remarks, and we'll of course get back to you. I think Ma'am Shamama is now able to connect her audio, so we'd like to hear from her. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahad. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, SDPI, and they've always given us this opportunity to voice our concerns about the situation in the industry area and business of KP. Most of the points have been covered by Shinwari Saab also, and Hassan Khyber Saab brought out very important points, and I'm going to reiterate the same. And I have a solution in my mind, the kind of, because whenever I see a lot of problems, my mind stops focusing on the problems and starts working towards the solutions of those problems, what all can be done, what are the low-hanging fruits, how can we reach the solutions of that problems. Yes, as our speakers first mentioned, that yes, there are lots of, there are 20 provincial acts, we have to deal with so many departments. The regulations are basically hindering. These are the fetters which are not allowing the businesses to flourish that well. There's a great uncertainty in different aspects. Uncertainty when it comes to the security, uncertainty also where the regulations and the policies of the governments are concerned. We are not sure when we're not clear when the government decides on changing the policies. So we have to race against time and work within those time period also. The government here is not encouraging the big corporations to come to the province. My interest and what I've been focusing and thinking about is the service industries, for example. The service industry, big service corporations, they don't have their head offices here. The ease of doing business for them is not present in KP. Whereas KP is a big province, it is its location, geographical location is very important. So it is the government can attract more service industries and service corporations here, which they're not doing. One other thing which I would want SDPI to both focus on and write in their reports also is the tourism industry. There are around 62 different kinds of tourism, and I think most of them are present in KP. We have religious tourism, we can do adventure tourism. So these things should be first categorized and then put attention, we should draw attention towards this. For this, a government should incentivize also, and the security of the area is also very important. When it comes to rules, regulations, one window operations, all these have been touched upon by other speakers, and these are very important issues for us. One other thing, another thing is that we are in our policies, whatever the policies we are making, of which most of us are part also, we have to give equal opportunities to the existing businesses as well as to the potential businesses. And the opportunities and the attractions and the incentives we are offering to the foreign investors, I think similar to the same tune should be offered to the local businesses also. I fear if we don't do that, it will have a cannibalizing effect on the existing businesses, because we are going to bring in more competition, and the existing business, our own people might, their businesses might be cannibalized. So we have to put focus on that also. Those who are sitting at policy making positions, those who are part of the boards where the positions are being made, the bureaucracy and research organizations, and they should focus on this, that they should not, the new businesses should not eat up the already existing, the businesses who are already trying hard to survive. We should keep that in our minds also. So yeah, and then again, one thing that we do have policies, but when we come to the implementation of those policies, it somehow doesn't take shape. The implementation becomes very tedious, it takes a lot of time and somehow does not take place. So, and I think at the same time, the government organizations, the government departments who are involved in these policies, that policies are being made for the business environment of KP, they are scared of taking decisions. The one thing that we have seen, that the government departments, the bureaucracy avoids taking decisions. They are too scared. They are also very insecure, and because of that insecurity, the implementation takes a longer period and somehow doesn't get implemented because of the insecurity in their services also. So these are a few things that were in my mind. Most of the things that I wanted to add, the points I had written, have already been touched upon by other speakers. Thank you very much.
Ahad, if that's okay, can we now move to Hassan Daud Butt for his interventions? I think we have had good response as well as inputs from our colleagues from the private sector. I think he has been listening very carefully, and I'm sure many of these issues are known to him very clearly. So Hassan Sab, I think it'll be best to not only give your own views on what the private sector has said, but also offer us a slightly more forward-looking overview that where is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province seeing the opportunity within the overall BRMI portfolio which Ahad was showing. Second, I think what Zahid Saab had mentioned, Zahidullah Shanwai Saab, regarding the potential of the industrial policy effort which you are leading. How best can we as non-government stakeholders help you in that effort as well? So it's over to you, Hassan Saab.
Right. Thank you so much. First of all, let me profoundly thank you and Ahad and SDPI for shifting your focus from what is happening all around in Islamabad to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Peshawar, because I know there are a lot of things, including agriculture sector and economic reform, that you are looking. I'm strategically better placed because I'm sitting in SDPI right now. I'm partially in Ministry of Planning because of the JCC coming up and CPEC. So they've asked my services back for 2 weeks. So I will be here helping them with CPEC till the JCC. And first of all, another small correction. My name is also Hassan, commonly known as Hassan, but Hassan. So you have two Hassans now working for KP.
Sir, okay, my apologies. I must apologize.
Not at all. So first of all, since you've asked me to give my opinion and how would I, work in the next, my time in my watch as CEO KP Board of Investment. So I'm a keen believer of, and I've been referring to this wherever I go, talking at universities and other forums as part of academia and what I'm doing right now, is that, as Deng Xiaoping said, it does not matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches the mice. So we are here to catch the mice. We are here to reduce the fat. And the method and perhaps maybe somewhat out of the box, because in terms of if you follow the normal regulatory process and the way that the government works and functions, perhaps the time might not happen during my watch. So I'm quite selfish about this, that whatever regulatory framework that we are working on, and in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of PRMI and other initiatives that the government, should happen during my watch, so that I can write home something. And I'm so happy that now we have people like Hassan and other stakeholders working with us and giving us the right kind of direction, because they understand the best case scenario. As soon as I joined, the first impression that I got while interacting with not just the business leaders but also political and administrative leadership is that the entire leadership across board understands that this is an extremely important phase in time, phase in history for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. You've referred to CAREC, CPAC. Since I was involved with CPAC since 2013, coming from China, and then CAREC also in Planning Commission. So I clearly understand how is the world looking at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But the interesting part is that people in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, especially the leadership, understand this and want to take benefit out of this. So immediately as I took over, the chief minister and also the finance minister and also my advisor on the industries and some of the key stakeholders, gave me the task of working on the mapping and also looking at the fat which is there. So immediately I started on my own on working on this. I got some help from Hassan and some of his team members, and based on that, in our finance bill 2020-21, we were able to reduce some of the fat. And I understand that I am the devil's advocate here, so let me just speak in terms of some of the initiatives. And then what I did was that since I was made the focal person for PRMI and also the Ease of Doing Business Committee on behalf of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government, we were able to showcase what we are doing. So the first challenge that I took for myself is to bring Peshawar in line with where Faisalabad and Karachi are. Because in the World Bank standard, you take two cities. So I've spoken to World Bank, and what they are doing is that they would now pitch Peshawar as one of the cities where some regulatory reform and especially in terms of SME sectors are being done. I also carried out one study and I compared Bangladesh with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and also Pakistan, but largely on Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and I was surprised. Then in most of the indicators that have been done privately, I found Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, if not equal, slightly lower than Bangladesh. But the area where we were lacking was the productivity part in terms of ease of doing business. And perhaps this is, and I'm continuously speaking to, and I teach in IM Sciences, so one day in a week. So I'm also talking to them in terms of helping and creating that triple-helix model where the academia and the government and perhaps private sector can. The other thing that I did, because I was giving two policy work to actually define in 3 months, was one, the industrial policy, and other the trade and commerce strategy, because the federal government was asking us to work on our trade and commerce policy, especially in line with how things are happening across border in Afghanistan. So I'm happy to report that immediately the committee that I set up with the help of finance minister included Shinwari Saab, who's part of the panel, and also from IM Sciences, from Peshawar University, and some of the other key stakeholders. I wish Ma'am Shamama was part of that, because I tried my best, but somehow the other she was occupied in other work with KPSME. So we were able to formulate this, and what we are doing right now is that we understand that the cost of land in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in terms of large enterprises is on the high side, because this is the land holding which people own and most of it is private sector led. So what we're doing is that where government, federal, the provincial government will offer land, that land, the cost of that land will not be taken upfront, but would be on a 5 to 10 years, depending on the investment. The other thing that was lacking in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, especially in terms of Board of Investment, that I realized was that the entire investment attraction agency was working like a government body. So I have completely transformed it now, and now that our regulations are approved, into a private sector led, a lean organization where continuity of job and also incentives would be offered based on investment that people attract. If they do not, they will fire, including myself. So that is how things are happening. So we have done mapping. We have identified the duplication of NOCs, registration and fees. There was a huge fat, but now we are in the process of reducing that. And I'm happy to report recently, Hassan Daud Butt also tweeted about it on the work that we are doing in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And I will share with all the panelists here some of the work that. The other aspect is that we realize in order to address corruption and complacency, we need to involve technology. So our ease of doing business portal is extremely important. We are having 16 services in that, and now since the government's focus was on the housing and sector, so immediately we worked on local government, and now we have achieved to a level where we can compete with Punjab and Sindh. The other great thing that has happened in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is in the PPP infrastructure sector, where Rashakai has been now being showcased as one of the biggest achievement of the province in terms of attracting a foreign. And I was involved with this from 2016 from federal government side and the Chinese government and all that. And I was speaking to Yao Qing last night, actually. He's in China, the former ambassador, and we spoke about something else. But again, Rashakai came in and he said that the government of China is looking at Rashakai to showcase in BRI. I was fortunate to participate in both the BRI forum, and there again, Rashakai stood out as potential. And now a potential project to be showcased in other countries in BRI, including Azerbaijan and some of these Central Cars and Central Asian countries. Punjab and Sindh are now looking at our model, both in Dabeji and also in case of Faisalabad, and they're asking how to actually redefine their structure in terms of attracting investment. The other aspect, because I'm talking on a larger canvas, not at a canvas because naturally we're doing things at a low pedestal also. But at a larger vision-wise, I think our chamber is also quite pragmatic, and they are now helping us in terms of defining the role of the government, because in terms of large enterprises and especially in terms of state-owned, I think the state-owned enterprises have need to take a step backward, and the private enterprises need to take a step forward in terms of not just Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, but the overall. So I've spoken to FFC. FFC is coming. Fatma Fertilizers are coming in the agriculture sector now in order to help us because of the agriculture growth. And some of large enterprises are coming. And hopefully, with the support of all your panelists here, if we are able to unleash our industrial policy, maybe in the forthcoming cabinet meeting, I think that should fetch us some good investment. Now coming to China, because that's my strength, I'll just take a minute on that. Chinese look at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as a stepping stone for Afghanistan and then beyond. Naturally, peace in Afghanistan is key to all what I'm saying, but let's take for a moment, consider that business happen in places where there is war. In war-led countries like Iran and Syria, there have been business, especially in the energy sector. So let's consider if the current state continues, still I think they look at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as a stepping stone, and we need to benefit, and perhaps this is where the newly merged district comes. I'm happy to report that just recently in DI Khan, the SAF group has come up with the first ever private sector SCZ, and now I'm in the process, and today I'll go to Federal BOI to discuss with them in terms of completion and getting its approval from the Prime Minister. So this would also launch a new platform where private sector would set up an SCZ. It would be a cement-led economic zone, but I think it would have an sort of sprinkling effect. I, on my part, lastly, and I'll close on this, is that I believe in ink spot development. You know, like we did in China, and since I've worked in China and I've lived in China for most of my life, so the professional life. So I think we should follow the model of Shenzhen, and then from there the ink spot development should take place. Instead of working on too many avenues, working on too many areas, we should, like Rashakai, create it as a center of excellence, learn from this model, and then develop more economic zones. I have been speaking to some of the board members and also CEO of KPSMEC, and I have been advocating the fact that we must take perhaps 4 SCZs at a time, because in our industrial development, we're looking at ease of doing business as one aspect, and the industrial zones and economic zones as the other way to go forward. So I think we should work on 4 economic zones at a time, develop them to be the best case scenario, and from there have the sprinkling effect for SIDB. The other area that I've worked on, though it's not part of your discussion, and I've had series of meetings with the leadership of SIDB and also is SIDB. And I think that's also an area in terms of the in terms of the work that they could support the large enterprises by providing the SME sector continuity is making SIDB work like a private enterprise also, based on performance-led growth. So I think overall things are changing, as Hassan referred, and they're happening fast. But as I said, I'm selfish to do it, the work that is assigned to me in my watch. It will happen perhaps in the next 3 to 5 years, but I will be happy to have it during the remaining 2 years of my time. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I think you really spoke from the heart, and Godspeed. And we are really hoping that many of the things which you have mentioned should be there for the facilitation of our business community at the very earliest. We will, of course, be coming back to you in just a while, but I need to first move to Mr. Muhammad Javed Ismail Saab from the State Bank. I understand that many of the things which Ahad's presentation had mentioned around credit, finance, and funding, he may like to comment on that. So it's over to Javed Ismail Saab, please.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank SDPI for actually inviting us for this discussion on this important topic. From State Bank perspective, reforms particularly focus on the private sector are important, and that's why most of our policies are actually directed toward actually promoting the financial business, and then obviously facilitating the borrowers and access of credit to the all the segments, and with particular focus on the underserved segments, so that we have certain schemes and refinance schemes available for actually promotion of those areas. So when I'm talking from the State Bank side, it's like because we are actually the regulator of the financial system, so it's the system thing that I will be more of discussing, and then I will be hinting on some of the issues or some of the aspect related to the KPK. So since we are actually discussing the reforms area, and just like Mr. Hassan has actually identified that that the 2 cities are being focused in the ease of doing business of the World Bank, ease of doing business ranking of the World Bank. So, and most of the rankings that we hear are on basis of the surveys that they have done in these 2 cities. And the results for the last 2 years seems quite encouraging, because the ranking has improved by almost 39 notches. It has came down from like 147 in 2018 to 108 in 2020. And since I am also engaged in some of the ease of doing business reforms related to the financial sector and other things, we expect that there's more to come, and I will give the reasons why there are actually some aspects which will be beneficial for the actually the business community that will facilitate financing in this area. So just talking about these reforms that has been actually carried out and are being pursued. There are three important aspects that I like to highlight, and these are the aspects that have been actually highlighted in the other presentation, other discussions as well. The one is that the reforms have like it's three aspects. The reform can be on the legal side, regulatory side. They can be on the institutionalization process that has been actually identified by the various stakeholders. And then important aspect is coordination between the policy implementing institutions, so that there is a coordinated policy response rather than just having working in silos and then have the policy response which don't work. And the last thing is about actually improving the operational processes that we already have in place. So these reforms that are being pursued from the ease of doing perspective have all these dimensions. And the fact is that usually the legal and regulatory reforms and institutional reforms usually take longer time. And it's the operational part which usually is the easier part, because that's is within the control of the institution. I'm talking more about the government institutions. So when we talk about this ease of doing business thing, the number of things that have actually improved, it's the electricity thing, it's the registering of property, and I'm talking basically on the basis of the World Bank survey, where it's the Karachi and Lahore has been actually the focus. Then trading across the borders, there is some improvement paying taxes. We don't have any major improvement in the getting credit and protecting of minority rights, but if you look at the ranking of the protecting of minority rights, it's already very good. It's even ranked best in the South Asia, and it's like very good in the world ranking as well. So my point is, and then about the getting credit thing, as I highlighted, there are certain legal and regulatory reforms and the institutional reforms that were required. So I will be discussing those reforms. So I will focus my rest of discussion on the reforms that have been done, that are being pursued, and that will be facilitative of the business community. And I will also like to discuss few of the points that have been highlighted in the previous discussion. So from the perspective of reforms, the State Bank of Pakistan has actually is one of the lead agency from the perspective of this getting credit aspect of this ease of doing business. So on the getting credit side, I have most of the discussions have actually highlighted that KPK has this businesses which are more of SMEs and less of the larger corporates, and that's why the extent of credit, if we look at the advances numbers or the financing numbers, they are like maybe in the range of like single digit in the overall financing. So from that perspective, recent reforms are actually focused on actually promoting the SMEs and facilitation of credit to the SMEs. The three aspects that I would like to highlight, there are two legal frameworks that have been put in place. One is the secure transaction registry, which actually was necessary to allow the micro, small and medium enterprises and even the agricultural enterprises to have an access to finance, and from the perspective of actually having their movable charges registered and documented. So from that perspective, Secure Transaction Act was enacted in 2016, and which was later on amended in 2020, so that we can have an electronic registry available where the banks and even the private parties can register their charges, their movable charges, which will actually allow access of finance to the micro enterprises, small enterprises, medium enterprises. So that registry has been established, and that was established in April 2020, and now banks are registering charges there. Even the private parties can even do this thing from the perspective of actually accessing finance through the financial institutions. Moving forward, there is another important reform is about this Corporate Rehabilitation Act, that is the insolvency perspective, that where the creditor stands in terms of insolvency, what are the priorities that have been actually clarified in the this insolvency regime that has been implemented. Moving forward, there are these are the reforms that have been actually part of the getting credit. And another important reform is that we have established the private sector credit bureaus. And these, you people already know that State Bank has this ECIB, Electronic Credit Information Bureau, where we only have the information on the advances. But these private sector credit bureaus can have more information. They can have information on the utilities and the retailers information that will allow them to actually generate other facilities like scorecards and the balance scorecard thing, which will actually allow the financial institution to go for SME financing, because they will be having information of the utility bills and the telecoms and our discos. They will be having that information, and that will actually help them to develop certain scorecards for the various borrowers and allow financing to these SME things. In addition to that, there are a number of aspects that we are working on, and this involves actually engagement with the federal government and the provincial governments for facilitation of the payments. State Bank has engaged with this FPR, the AGPR, then also the Controller General office as well. So through engagement, we have actually facilitated the payment of taxes through ADCs. FPR collections are actually increasing through ADC, which is not only actually improving the revenues, but it is also actually facilitating the businessmen to have a ease of actually paying their taxes. We are also working with the provincial governments and the tax collection of the SRB, this Sindh Revenue Board, and the Punjab Revenue Board. They are moving on. Number of collections are now being made through the ADCs. We are also engaged with this KPK government, and still we were still to actually have some thing on table, but the things are moving positively, and we understand once those agreements are executed with the governments of Balochistan and the KPK, that will actually facilitate in improving the ADC related payments for the businesses, and that will actually facilitate businesses as well. The last thing from the reforms perspective, you people must have maybe heard about this and utilized even the facilities that has been introduced by State Bank of Pakistan in the recent times, especially during the COVID-19 thing. Few of the schemes that were actually we introduced, the main item was obviously the monetary easing that we did over the 2.5 months, where we decreased the interest rates by 6.25%, and which has actually brought down the cost of borrowing substantially. And if you look at the recent corporate numbers, I was just looking at some of the latest results, and there is substantial decrease in the financial cost of those corporates, which is good from the perspective of actually their profitability. And similarly, there are a number of free finance schemes that have been introduced for the to support the employment, to avoid layoffs, to support the health sector, and even the promotion of the new investments as well. And if you look at the outcomes of those schemes, it's like 4% of the GDP. It's about 1.7 trillion of financing of the facilities that have been actually provided through various schemes that have been launched by State Bank of Pakistan. The most important of these schemes is about this, what we call is the deferment of the loans that has been done. And that has actually so far been quite successful, with deferments of about 700 billion rupees approved for the industry, which is a huge number.
Javed sir, if I can ask you one question here.
And because I do understand that State Bank was encouraging Pakistan Banks Association to expand the banking network in the newly merged districts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Has there been a progress on that? Is there a timeline around that? If you can also inform our audience regarding that.
You see, our branch licensing policy requires the banks to actually open 20% branches in the unbanked and underserved areas. So that is already there. And then we are, as a part of the national financial inclusion policy, we are promoting the banks to go with the alternate delivery channels and the other digital payments, so that the access of the banking services and financial services can be increased. So the three things that I would actually like to discuss from the points raised by the discussants. One was about this energy thing, that there are certain energy related issues. State Bank has actually this refinancing schemes for alternate energy resources like solar and this wind options, which is very actually lucrative with only 6% of the rate, where bank can have even utilize part of its can forego a part of its a portion of the interest rate, and then it can be maximum of 6%. So that option can be utilized, which can actually reduce the energy cost for the businesses. Similarly, recently the housing scheme, where State Bank actually has asked the banking industry to utilize a part of the cash reserve ratio. It's about 140 billion of cash reserve ratio that we have actually released to the banks, so that they can actually do the housing finance. And I'm very much sure that this will actually promote the issue of the construction that is being highlighted by the other discussers as well. Then on the digitization, recently State Bank has actually started the initiative of facilitating the FX related matters, all the matters. It's not only one matter, whether it's information, whether it's approval, whether you need some clarification, all can be done on the end-to-end digital solution. So from my perspective, a number of issues that has been raised by the discussants are actually have their solution in this digital proliferation and digitization of the services and digitization of the various services that has been provided by the government departments. And if you look at this starting business thing, the registration of the companies, where now a registration of company means that you get your tax number as well immediately, and even the sales tax things as well. So the point is that there are things that have been done, and there are other things that are being done. So there are priority sectors that we are focusing on. Specifically, there was a question of what will be the actually the fate of these schemes once in the coming days. So from that perspective, I will highlight 2 points. There are about 8 schemes, like the long schemes, which include the long-term financing scheme, and then there are other export refinance scheme, and the number of schemes which are actually of permanent nature, and those schemes are there, which include this energy financing, concession energy financing, concession export refinance, and then there is an agriculture concession financing scheme, concession financing scheme for SMEs. Those schemes are there. So those schemes are not going anywhere as of now. The schemes that will actually see they have some sunset provisions are those related to these layoffs, which are specifically introduced for the purpose of this COVID-19 thing. And then there are other schemes like this loan restructuring and loan deferment. Those schemes are specifically for the COVID-19. They are not actually the general schemes that are for the what we say is the general promotion of the investment activity. So there are schemes, number 8, 9 schemes, where the rate ranges from like 3% to 6%, which is quite low as compared to the rate being charged by the banks. And these schemes provide opportunity to all facets. It's not only that the small businesses are served, even the large businesses are also being served. So those schemes are there.
In the interest of time, because I think this is very helpful that you have informed us regarding the future outlook of these schemes as well. And given that I think most of the businesses are also anticipating a prolonged incidence of COVID and its impact on their businesses, so it's really heartening to know that there could be a sort of extension or possibility of extension of these schemes remaining around. We do understand that this is subject to resources, but Javed sir, really appreciate these inputs. And if you allow me, and in the interest of time, we could quickly give 1 minute each to all the panelists, because I think before we close, I would really like to give them one more opportunity for any other thoughts on this subject. And I would also request Javed Sab, yourself and the other panelists to look into the chat and the Q&A box in case you would like to answer or write any of the questions, answers to any of the questions from our audience. So maybe I can, before I close, I can request 1 minute each to our panel for any final thoughts. Okay, so I could move to Hassan Khyber sir.
Ji, thank you so much, Dr. Sahab. I think what an enlightening discussion, and I think right now the agenda is pretty much chalked out for all of us, and I think all of us have a very important role for private sector to keep on providing us the pulse of the problems. Think tanks like SDPI to bring in the manpower, the intellectual manpower, programs like SEED to provide funding, and then people like Hassan Daud Butt Sahab and other parts of the KP government to take these resources, take this agenda, and take this forward. My request to you and all of our panelists and partners would be to keep this conversation going. You told me that this is like one of the 3 events that you have conducted, but I think each of these issues need a separate conversation. Regulatory modernization, simplification needs one, financing needs another. You talked about the provincial tax regime, how to make it more targeted in the beginning. I think that needs a separate conversation, and you have had some, but I think we need to kind of keep these conversations going. But I would like to congratulate you, the team that is working with you, that they have put together such an excellent series of dialogues, and I'm sure it would go a long way in helping us steer this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time and thoughts today. And I would like to move to Hassan Daud Butt Sahab. And sir, maybe if I can also pose a small question, that you have been championing the triple helix across our academic institutions. You've been going from, of course, you've also motivated the Chinese universities to engage with Pakistani universities as well and produce evidence on how the private sector can interact and for joint ventures and partnerships going forward. So if there's any message in that respect as well, we would appreciate that. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. I would not, I echo actually what Hassan has said about this seminar and how you've taken it forward, and I think this should continue. I think maybe we can have a regular series of this, and we can also some of the other engage some like trade facilitation officers who work in various countries to be part of this and see how the world looks at us and how investors would like to see our reforms happening. So if you could join hands with us and we can do this together. In terms of what we have discussed thus far and in terms of what Javed Saab said, I think my only caption to that would be that whatever promises we make, we should be able to fulfill them. Unless we do not that, you can write all sort of fiscal and financial incentives that we offer, and this is what our religion also asks us to do, not just in terms of attracting business and investment, but in terms of its religious connotation. I think we should be able to only promise those which we can deliver. And this has been my philosophy always. In terms of triple helix, I think that, this is very close to my heart. We try to do, do a marriage making with Chinese universities when I was in CPAC, and we set up that consortium of business schools with Chinese. The good thing about working in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is that it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody, especially in Peshawar, in academia, in business sector, and either they're relatives or they've been classmates or students together in somewhere in some part of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So that helps us in terms of taking this. The initiative that I have taken, and Zahid Sahab has been very supportive, is that we're trying to set up an R&D cell. The only negative observation I have in terms of Board of Investment is that a lot of research work has been done, but there's no archiving mechanism available. So what we're doing is that we're setting up an R&D cell, and this would facilitate the triple helix. We will offer this facility to private sector. We'll offer that R&D facility, and I hope that happens quickly. In this, lastly, just 30 seconds more. I think there was a question, I just went through all of them, about women empowerment, and I'm happy to report, because I was engaged in the committee for industries during COVID-19, and just in 2019, our e-commerce, or I think the IT part of our commerce, has done about 300 million, slightly less than 300,000 actually dollars worth of done by female. This research I was doing for some other work. So I think there's a huge scope. I teach in IM Sciences, and I see a lot of female studying projects management, which traditionally is an extrovert thing. So I think the women in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa need to realize this potential. They have a natural knack of doing business and also understanding business. They've been doing this historically. So I think just have to leverage this time, leverage the advantage that CPAC, CAREC, KP Economic Corridor is doing, the regional urban-rural synergy. One request, if I could make to all the policy makers here, and if you could echo this wherever you go, and I need Hassan's support in this also, would be that we need to provide better broadband facility across Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This facility is miserable as we speak.
Absolutely, and of course the low internet penetration rates have really affected the response in COVID times as well. Thank you indeed, sir. Any last comments, Javed Saab, or inputs?
The discussions that we have today are very fruitful, because that has actually allowed the issues that faced by the private sector brought up front, and then the State Bank is actually available for facilitating wherever it can. And then the important thing from the policy perspective is the policy should be actually done in a collaborative manner and close coordination, so that any area shouldn't be missed. And the one thing that was discussed by Mr. Hassan as well is about the women empowerment, and I would just like to highlight there is a very concessional scheme of 5% for the guarantee scheme for women entrepreneurs that is available, introduced by the State Bank of Pakistan, which can be utilized to actually for facilitating the women entrepreneurs as well. So I have enjoyed this discussion, because it has allowed a lot of points from the private sector, and would like to be part of similar discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes. So thank you, Javed Saab. And what I'm going to request my colleague Ahad to do is that he's going to share with you the draft PRMI strategy which the Board of Investment has put together. in consultation with the provincial arms as well, and I think Mr. Hassan Daud Butt Saab's input has also gone into it. We would like to share it with all the panelists and anyone from our audience who would like to have this, and we will really appreciate your further inputs on that, because we do understand that many of those interventions are going to be part of the upcoming or FY21 Finance Act as well. So on behalf of SDPI, I would like to thank all of you for your time and thoughtful interventions today, and really look forward to remaining in touch during the future parts of this series. Thank you so much.